All right, these are the first problems that we are going to review for Ms. Heigel's CP Math 2 course on quadratics. This is for our upcoming test on pages 58 through 67. So this first problem is page 58, number 5. Factor the following. So on A here, what we're looking for is a factor that we can divide out of both 2x squared and the negative 4x. So the way I think about it is we're looking for a number first that we can factor out of each of these. So we have 2 and negative 4, and the number that we can factor out is a 2. All right. Now once we have the number, our coefficient, we're going to look at a variable that we can factor out. Since this has an x squared and this has an x, we can divide an x out of both of these. And that's the idea. We're just dividing out an x, and we're bringing it out to the front of our parentheses. Okay, now the question is, what do we have left? If we divide a 2x out of this first term, 2x squared, we would have an x left over. The whole point is, notice that 2x times x gives you the x squared. Now if we divide a 2x out of the negative 4x, we would end up with a negative 2. Again, I typically double check by going 2x times negative 2 is negative 4x. So now this factored 2x squared minus 4x gave us 2x times x minus 2. You could check it again by going 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times negative 2 is negative 4x. Okay, let's look at B. B is slightly different here. On B, what we have is we have a trinomial with a x term. So that means that we have an x squared, an x, and then a number. When we have these, and they look similar down here on number 4, we're going to do what we call a double bubble, or we're going to have two binomial factors. Like so. So basically we're going to have two factors that look like this. So the way I think about this is I know that these first two spots right here, which on this one is an x, these first two spots have to multiply to give us x squared. So those two things would be x times x gives us x squared. The only other thing we could have is an x squared times 1. But we're breaking down our x squared into x times x. The second thing I look for is I need two numbers that multiply to 144. And the first thing that pops in mind usually is 12 and 12. So 12 times 12 is 144. I'll put a 12 here and a 12 here. And I'll put two positives here because positive 12 times positive 12 gives you 144. Now the only thing you have to check is to see if you multiply your outside here, these two outside terms, see what you get there, that's 12x. Multiply these inside terms, that's also 12x. When you add those together, you have to get 24x. So now if you multiply this all out, you get x times x, which would be x squared. I'll do that up top. We would go x times 12 is 12x. Twelve times x is 12x. Oops, should have put an x right there. And then 12 times 12, which is 144. And we see that it works. Okay, we can simplify this a little bit further into, since there's two the same thing multiplied together, we have x plus 12 quantity squared. Okay, and that would be your factorization on B. C. On C, it's similar to A. We look and see what can I take out of, because we don't have the trinomial, so we're not going to have two double bubbles here. First thing I always check is to see if there's anything I can factor out of both of these. So I can take an x. I can't take any numbers out of both of these, but I can take an x. So if I factor an x out, what would I be left with here? Well, x squared and divided by an x would give me an x. And then 3x divided by x, because I factored the x out, would give me a plus 3. And again, notice that x times x is x squared, x times 3 is 3x, that checks. Okay, now for number 4, it's the same idea we had with these. Now this is like a b here. This is called a perfect square trinomial. It's a perfect square because these two numbers here are the same, and then you can come up with a perfect square here, an x plus 12 squared. So one of the things we look for is, how do we get from 144 to 12? Well, the square root of 144 is 12. So we can use that idea here on A. And I'll just start with the idea of taking the two bubbles. We know that these two have to multiply to give you x squared. And then 36 can be broken into 6 times 6. I knew what it was because it had to be a perfect square. And the square root of 36 is 6, or 6 squared is 36. Okay? They would both be minus because I need them to add to a negative 12. So these two have to add to negative 12. So my perfect square would be x minus 6 squared. That's your answer. On B, same idea. I know I have x times x will give me the x squared here. Now, what number squared is 49? That would be 7 squared. So my 7's go here. It is a plus. These are both pluses because they have to add to give me this positive 14x. I can combine them into x plus 7 quantity squared. And then C, same idea, x and x. What squared gives me 100? Or what times itself gives me 100? That's 10. We have minus here because they have to add to a negative 20. X simplified would be x minus 10 squared.